Start. Great. Okay, good. All right. So my name is Dadmun Bixby, and I am with Philanthropy Studio. I am based in Portland, Oregon. However, I grew up in San Diego. I have deep roots in San Diego, and I continue to work in San Diego too. My family first arrived in 1883. I grew up across the freeway from USD and went to high school across the street at what was called Uni. It's no longer there. But anyway, I am so happy to be here today and share with you some things that I have learned during the last few months. And I want to add that it's been an interesting week even too. So some of the things I'm going to share with you, I have, or some of the things that are on my slide, I am going to revise a little bit because a lot has changed in the last week. So I love questions, and I want you to send in your questions, and my tech folks will be sending those over to me. I'll have time at the end when I can answer your questions, but I like to do things in real time. I'm trained as a teacher, so this is a really unusual model for me to be talking at you and not seeing your faces, and not doing things that are more interactive. So I want to make it as interactive as I can. The other thing that I want you to be thinking about is how can you be most comfortable during the next 75 minutes or so? The slides that I prepared have actually quite a bit of text on them. And the reason for that is because I want you, probably someone like me, who has been spending a lot of time looking at screens, to be able to do something else instead of having to look at the screen. In your app, the Socia app on your phone, you can see that my slides are in there, the handouts are in there. I've also got a couple examples of letters. So if you know that you're going to be more comfortable doing a craft project, or you would like to put on your walking shoes and take a walk around outside, or if you want to lie down on the floor and put your legs at the wall because you know you need some restorative time, then please feel free to do that. Next slide, please. So when I first created this webinar, and this is probably the 5th time I've taught fundraising during a crisis since late March. Our times have evolved quite a bit. But there are some things that have stayed the same. And one is I'm really encouraging organizations to use this as a time of strategy, planning, and vision. And you heard Lynn and you heard Laura talk earlier about strategy and how important it is in nonprofits. I want you to spend time thinking about how can you emerge stronger as an organization at the end of this time. And that has to do with your fundraising too. This is a great time for you to take stock. I will go over what it means to conduct a successful campaign. I teach nonprofits how to raise money. I worked with several organizations on doing campaigns during the early part of the COVID crisis that were really successful. However, right now is not a great time to conduct a campaign. Excuse me, what I want you to think about though is your year-end campaign. Excuse me. Also, keep in mind, or one of the things we'll be talking about is if you are shifting to a virtual event and what that would look like. So let's go to the next slide. So there's been a lot of talk about what fundraising is like during a crisis. And this one has several pieces overlaid on it, doesn't it? Because we started out with a health crisis, which then became an economic crisis. And now we're in the middle of basically a civil rights movement that is going on. And in the beginning, we saw a crisis high in giving. So the organizations that were able to raise money, they were able to talk about what is going to happen to their organization during the shutdown, the stay-at-home order, how they were being responsive during the crisis and whatnot. If you did conduct a campaign, and the organizations I saw that did, they were able to ride what I call a crisis high. We are now starting in what I would call the crisis low. And what I mean by that is that the shift from talking about the coronavirus, it's still there, but it really is number two, or maybe even three, depending on the news cycle. People have been out of work for a little while. We now have the issues that are going on with the recent death of George Floyd, and the conversations that are going on about our police departments and what they should look like. Of course, there's been massive protesting. There's been quite a bit in my community. There's been big distractions. So people aren't giving as much to that issue in particular. Depending on your organization, it may or may not be appropriate to be asking for money right now. And I will have to say that right now is a time when you need to be extra sensitive about your communications. And I'm going to go into that more. We will go into a recovery period, and some people might say, well, it sounds like we're going into a recovery period because people are going back to work. And that is true. However, we know from looking at past pandemics, past cycles of flus, that there's a good chance that there will be a second wave, and it's probably going to be stronger than the first. So it won't be a true recovery period. Now, I am not an economist, and I'm certainly not an epidemiologist, but I've been doing a lot of reading about all of this, and these are some of the things that I'm hearing. I also have heard that Wall Street thinks that this is going to be a short economic downturn. So that's good news for all of us, isn't it? But you heard from the vice governor that we've got a couple years ahead of us that are probably going to be difficult. And that's all the more reason why we need to be thinking about how we are going to conduct our business in the next couple years, and what we want our organization to look like at the end of this. Next slide. So communication, I think, is going to be one of the most important tools we use over the next couple years as we go in and out of offices. This is an extremely distracting time for people. I don't know how it is for all of you working with your boards or whatnot, or volunteers, or even trying to communicate with each other. You probably have moments where you think, wow, working remotely has been really powerful and has worked really well. And there's also a certain amount of lag time that happens. And it's because people are distracted. They're worried. They've been trying to educate their children at home. They've been working in close quarters. They've been worried about jobs and whatnot. That said, it is so important that you continue to communicate with your donors about certain pieces. I want to put I want to pause here, because communication is really important, but we are in a unique time right now. Now, as you can see, if you're looking at the screen, I am a white woman. I grew up in a very privileged background, and I am classically trained in fundraising, and I'm doing the best that I can to try and be more aware of different points of view. So keep that in mind. I also think it's really important that white people in particular are super sensitive to the messages that are going on right now, and that we are listening to people of color, and especially Black folks, who have a lot to say about what's going on in this really unique time in our history. So what I have seen, and I'm not saying this is what you should do or what you shouldn't do, this is what I have been seeing. There's been a lot of solidarity messaging that has been going out lately from different organizations. I've seen some beautifully, carefully, mindfully crafted messaging. I've seen some messages that I thought were probably not best coming from that person that have gone out. I've seen people say, we're going to pause messaging right now. And if you want to listen to people and what they have to say about what's going on in this time period, here's a list of resources. There's a woman by the name of Bina Patel who is going to be speaking in the Nonprofit Academy today. I would look to her as someone who you should be listening to right now. It's just important that we are sensitive. I know of an organization that was supposed to have an event last weekend and they canceled it because they felt like we can't be doing a fundraising event right now, when to change it. So this is what I'm talking about, sensitivity and communication. So I'm going to give you these messages, but I want to be really sensitive to where we are at this precise moment in time. Okay. What is important, that said, is keep in mind how you're communicating the changes in your workplace, the honest status of your employees, how the virus and other issues that are going on right now are affecting your mission, like the solidarity message I just said, your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is also an opportunity for you to write and create a robust communications plan that is based on feedback and dovetails with your fundraising plan. So I have worked with clients who have done surveys recently to their constituency and have gotten some really important information back. So this is not a time for guesswork. This is a time for you to, as Lynn talked about several times, and Laura, about data. So get real life feedback from your constituents and what they want to hear about from you. Next slide. So how are you going to emerge stronger at the end of this crisis? These are some pieces that I think are going to be really important for you to keep in mind. Get strategic. Share your plans for the future. What do you want to look like at the end of this time? And talk about that with your constituents. Get feedback from your closest, your nearest and dearest. So of course you would have your staff involved in this messaging. You would get your board involved in the messaging. And maybe this is a great way for you to test it and talking with some of your closest volunteers and donors. Stellar communications. So that's something I just touched on right now, is I think that this is going to make or break a lot of organizations. I mean, you think about all the museums right now that are closed, and some of the things that they are doing to stay connected when people cannot go through their doors. This is a time for you to get to know your donors. It is not too late for you to start generating lists of your donors and reaching out to them personally. Ask for their feedback and listen to them. Find out how they are. Start the conversations with, how are you? Take this as an opportunity just to get to know them more deeply and find out why they care about your mission. Not necessarily as a time to ask for money, but to build and strengthen your relationship. These are some of the pieces that I think are going to be the most important for organizations. They're going to emerge stronger at the end of this crisis. Next slide. As a team, think about what are the 3 most important messages about your mission and communicate them. So I work with some organizations that it's hard to talk about what they do. So we have spent more time recently boiling it down so that it's easier for their constituency to understand, their donors, their volunteers, what the organization does. Don't make assumptions. So this is a fun thing that I think you could work on with your development team, with your board. What are the 3 most important messages that we think we as an organization need to convey? Next slide. So For the fundraisers, here, I want you to use this time to get stronger. And here are some things that I think would be good for you to focus on. So invest in your staff. It breaks my heart when I hear of organizations that are letting go of fundraisers, because I think right now you need your fundraising staff more than ever, though I understand that we are facing some uncertain times. There are ways that you can invest in your staff, do capacity building like today, that don't cost anything. There's so many free webinars out there right now. There's, Gail Perry is doing something once a week. She's outstanding. Spend some time on LinkedIn. There's some thought leaders out there that you may come across. A lot of people are giving away free content right now. Take turns learning new things and teaching it to your team. And in your team, it's important that you include your executive director. It's important that you include your board. This is an opportunity to get a mentor. Years ago, I went to a symposium like this. Of course, it was in person. And I found a woman who I thought, she's someone I want to learn from. And she spent time with me, and I learned a lot from her. This is also a good time for you to look at cross-training. Make sure that not one person in your department is the only person that knows how to access your database, things like that. Teach your board how to cultivate and steward right now, okay? So cultivation, bringing your donors closer to mission, stewardship, saying thank you, and showing what you did with the money. Get your board involved in really easy activities to help them be a part of the fundraising process and not freak them out. Have fun with communications. And I'm going to show you some communications where I think some organizations are having fun. Again, right now, I'd be careful about sending out messages that are too fun, especially depending on your mission. But I think you get what I'm saying about also mixing it up a little bit, make it interactive. And then meet your donors in creative ways. So San Diego, you're further ahead of where we are in Portland right now as far as opening up. And you've got so many beautiful open spaces. Who said that you can't stand, on a doorstep and drop off something thoughtful for a donor and talk to them from a distance? Maybe meet with them if they're comfortable in their garden and you wear masks. Meet with them virtually. You can meet maybe in small groups with people who trust each other and feel comfortable. You don't know until you ask. Next slide. So leadership, allow time to think strategically and try new things. As I said, so leadership, board, executive directors, because I know there's a wide variety of people that are on this webinar right now. Use this time to think strategically. Think about 3 years from now, how are we going to emerge stronger? Where are our weak spots that we need to strengthen? What are our strengths that we need to communicate? Meet with each board member right now and get their feedback. I heard a lot of complaints early on about executive directors were saying to me, people I'm coaching, working with, saying, I haven't heard anything from my board. And I certainly hope that that has changed. Reach out to them, set up virtual coffee dates like Lynn talked about. Get feedback, find out where they are. How do they want to become more involved? How can we strengthen our board right now? This, I think, is a great time for you to be working on board recruitment, your onboarding process, and helping board members develop annual work plans so they know how they can help you reach that vision that you will create as a group. I think it's an excellent time to recruit new board members. There are people out there who are looking for ways to make a difference right now. They want to help. And that's why I think there was so much giving in the beginning, because people felt helpless and they want to see the organizations that they care about succeed and help others during this time. Next slide. So I want to shift gears a little bit because I want to talk about some basics. And I saw this really, I saw great success in the COVID campaigns that we did, you know, month, 6 weeks ago, and so on. These are some of the steps that we took that led to great success. So when you create a campaign, any campaign, first of all, the further out you plan, the better. So be thinking about this in terms of your virtual events, in terms of your year-end appeal and whatnot. First of all, donors like specifics. So create your goal and be specific about what you're raising money for. There's often this temptation to give this laundry list of all the things that we do. Be strategic and think of exactly something that you need help with that they can support you in. Name the campaign. This is another thing that I have found to be helpful, and use it as a tag as you go through, and set an amount. This also helps your board and your closest donors to understand where you're going. Reach out to your donors personally to start the campaign and tell them, we've got this goal. Would you be willing to help kick it off? So as we go through the next 18 months or so on, going in and out of COVID and whatnot, it's a very sensitive time. So it's important that when you do reach out to your donors, that you are listening more than ever. How are you? What is going on with you in your life? Listen to hear if they still have a job, or that someone in their family isn't sick or whatever, because you don't want to ask them for money only to find out that they have had to painfully tell you no. Listen first. Stay in touch. Don't be shy about asking for support when it is the right time. I'm not saying right now is the right time, but it will be again before we know it. It's going to be time to be planning for your event. It's going to be time to plan for your year-end appeal. Segment your mailings and be thoughtful about that. So have specific messages. You gave at this time, we're now asking you to support us here, or we haven't heard from you for a couple years. Would you be willing to support us now? And so on. Multi-channels of communication. So what I like to see is when you're in the middle of your campaign, you're sending out emails that have content, that are talking about your mission, you're cultivating your donors. And then you also have ask emails. So you're mixing it up, that you're asking for press coverage. I think that nonprofits aren't good about, I mean, we're the third sector, right? I agree with Lee. We should be the first sector. We are on the front lines of always helping our community when they need us. And I don't think we do a good enough job of sharing the important work that we're doing. Use social media. And, yes, millennials are good at social media. I know that there's some older folks out there that are too. Be creative with your hashtags, asking local celebrities or influencers to share, and then celebrate and thank. Okay. Show the progress of your campaign as you go. So important. If you get anything out of this webinar today, it's that I hope you will be committed to spending more time thanking your donors, getting your board involved in writing thank you notes, making thank you calls, give them a script. And maybe do something exceptional. I gave to an organization for the first time. I think their event was in March, a Seattle group called Solid Ground. They sent me a beautiful handwritten postcard that I received within 48 hours of my gift, and I'm still talking about it. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about a couple, I'm going to give you a couple examples of COVID campaigns. And this one we called Neighbor to Neighbor. It was about the COVID-19 campaign, or, in response to the crisis and the work that they were doing, because they had to make some very quick pivots. Social service agency that is based in Portland. They have a food bank. They have Head Start. They work with seniors. So you can see that these group activities were no longer going to work, but they knew it was important that they keep reaching the people that are important to them, and they were going to need support from the community to do that. Next slide. So we had this landing page. Well, first of all, their website, they quickly changed and made a statement about COVID. And of course, this feels like old news right now, doesn't it? However, I think it's really important to highlight the need for responsiveness, because I was working with groups that it took them a very long time to change their website and talk about their COVID response. Right now, you may want to have your solidarity message that is right there front and center. It depends on your organization. Next slide. And then they had a landing page like this. They use a giving platform called Give Lively, which is free with the exception of credit card fees. And it's a simple multi-platform giving platform, and they use this, and you can see here that when you go to the page, it's got goal tracking on where they were. That we had a goal of $100,000. We actually ended up exceeding that by quite a bit. But more messaging about what happened and why. This is how they handled it from their web standpoint. Next slide. So that was a campaign. Let's talk a little bit about staying in touch via engaging email communications. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. One is the Women's Museum of California, and the other is West Columbia Gorge Humane Society. So Women's Museum of California, and I wonder if any of you are on right now, is located in San Diego at Liberty Station, and I think they have done an outstanding job of staying in touch with their constituents, as well as the West Columbia Gorge Humane Society, which is in Southern Washington. Next slide. So Humane Society, you'd think, who would be interested in supporting them during a pandemic? Well, we found out that a lot of people did. And what happened is that, looking at the downturn in 2008, what the Humane Society saw is that they will see an uptick in surrendered animals, need for pet food, need for veterinary care. If people were getting sick, they may need temporary boarding for their pets if they had to be hospitalized and whatnot. So that was the focus of that campaign, and it was a huge success. A lot of their supporters stepped up for them, and quickly. The other thing that we did is that we started doing some fun interactions that gave people things to do with their pets and think about their pets so that they could care for them better. So they started sending out Friday pet tips, and which I highly recommend you consider subscribing to if you have a pet. It doesn't matter if the information is coming from Washington State. And they have seen that the emails that they sent out, and this is stuff that they've been measuring, which I think is really important that you measure, is the efficacy of their communications. Their constituency loves videos, and if you look at their videos, you'll see why. They have someone that helps them with them a little bit, but they were doing a lot of this stuff from home. Well, they were doing all of it from home, and then they had someone that was doing a little bit of editing. And it has been very successful. Great way to engage with their constituents and get their mission out. Next slide. Another organization that I think has done a really super job, as I said, is the Women's Museum of California. I highly recommend you subscribe to their newsletter, which comes out about once a week. As you can see here, they had 1 week a virtual Women of the Gas Lamp tour. And they have other interactive pieces they've done that have been really interesting. And as I mentioned to you, my family first settled in San Diego in 1883. So this was really interesting for me, thinking about, the women in my family probably saw some of these women and they went through these environments. Very engaging for me. And I think it would be for you too. So I suggest you check them out. Next slide. So don't be shy to ask for help. It is going to take a village to get through this. And one of the things that I want you to think about is reimagine. And, Lynn touched on this earlier in his opening statements about, are you going to continue to need a building after all of this? You need to be really sensitive to your staff and talk to them. And if people are going to start working remotely on a more consistent basis, they need to have the tools that they need. But it's important that you involve as many of your team as possible in reimagining what your organization is going to look like. Involve your board, willing staff, volunteers. If you have staff that don't have as much to do right now, enroll them in helping you with this capacity building piece. Maybe they're willing to make, if you know someone's good on the phone, maybe they're willing to make calls to donors and thank them. Maybe they're willing to write handwritten notes. Volunteers are looking for things to do from home. Now, right now, we're in a new era, and I think people are really ready to go to the beach. But in the fall, it's probably going to be different. So don't be afraid to ask them for support. Next slide. So let's shift gears here to events that you're planning for this summer or fall. Wow, that has probably been one of the areas where we were the hardest hit, right? I've got this event planned and I've got to figure out how I'm going to make budget and so on. And there were several organizations that were our trailblazers, right? That helped us figure out what works, what doesn't work. And it's a process that I'm watching evolve. I've been involved in helping plan a few virtual events, and I'm already making changes to the way that we're doing it. So let's spend a little time talking about that. Next slide. So this is what I've seen. I've watched a bunch of these events, and as I said, I've helped plan them. And these are some of the things that I have seen that I want you to pay attention to. Not all platforms are equal. Choose your program and your streaming carefully, all right? Zoom was intended for meetings. And as I said to you in the beginning of this webinar, I wanted to say conversation, but really it's one-sided, right? Is that we're spending a lot of time in front of screens right now. And as the country is opening back up again, people are going to want to spend less and less time in front of their computers. So you need to be mindful of the way you're going to communicate with them and what platforms you're going to use to do it. So consider hiring a professional to help you with live streaming. Zoom is not great for that. I watched an event not long ago that did it all through Zoom and then Facebook, and I felt like I was watching a meeting where somebody was reading a script, and it was really dry. So be careful about that. If you were planning on spending a lot of money in other areas to do your event, you may, reallocate some of that money to help with live streaming and someone who really knows what they're doing. We've got a company helping us today, right? I don't know if they do virtual events for fundraisers or not. Also, look to the churches. They have been doing a lot of live streaming. If you're connected to a church, there are nonprofit organizations in San Diego that are media based. Look at an event that you thought went well, reach out to your colleague and ask them how they did it. And then be very careful about who is speaking for your organization. Plan your program carefully as you would in any kind of event. But I think now more than ever, people can't turn away and focus on their dessert or get up and go to the bathroom. I mean, I guess certainly you could and then come back, but it's a different kind of engagement than if you were seated in a ballroom someplace. So be mindful of that. Who's speaking for your organization? Think about those 3 messages we talked about earlier for your organization and weave those through. Next slide. So here are some pro tips that I have learned from organizations that have been successful in planning a virtual event. This might sound like a no-brainer, but it's really true. Raise as much of your goal as possible in advance. There's a wild card piece to the live event that's really different from when you've got a group of people that are contained in your room. The energy of the room, the fun kind of peer pressure that happens, it's just not, you don't have that when someone's watching it alone. You could have parties where people are doing it. I'm starting to see folks talking about doing that now, and that may evolve. We'll see. But raise as much of your goal as possible in advance, and then you're more likely to be successful. What I'm hoping in that reimagine piece I talked about earlier is that I would love to see that we start evolving out of auctions, period, because I feel like when we ask people to give money to organizations as donations and get something, like when they're buying something from an auction, it's almost our way of, it's almost like making an excuse like, please support us by at least you get this thing. And I think it's a distraction from really beautiful philanthropy that comes when organizations build relationships with donors and truly make them partners. That said, that's my reimagine for the end, is that at the end of all of this, maybe we have less auctions. If you have an auction plan for this year and you need to have items, focus on things that are pandemic useful or friendly. So I've been spending a lot of time at home. I think all of us have. And, I'm looking around at things like, we spent a lot of time in the garden. So maybe there are things like you could get a master gardener that would be willing to give their time. Maybe it's someone that would be willing to build a tool shed. Think about things like that. Or it's a home at the beach that you could rent, or, that you could give. Stuff like that, close to home, but still going to be fun for someone to buy. So your new sponsorship kit, some people say like, what am I going to do? How am I going to ask, sponsors to support us? Like, what kind of benefits are they going to get? Digital opportunities galore, right? Because you've got the emails you're sending out, you've got your website, you've got your videos that you're going to do for your special appeal and for your live portion. There's a lot of opportunities. When you send out those thank you letters, have a banner to the side that has all your sponsors on it. There's so many things that you can do. Less is more. Keep it to under an hour. All right. We were going to do a lunchtime event with one of my clients, and the board said, you know what? I barely take lunch. I can't stop. Can we make it 4 to 5? Thank you, Bayside Community Center, for your point about auctions versus deep and meaningful philanthropic motivation. I appreciate that. And if you have other comments, please send them my way. So less is more, keep it under an hour, and find that sweet spot for your table, your traditional table hosts, your sponsors, your board members, the people who are going to bring people to your virtual event. Find out when is a good time. And then, oh, Lauren, thank you, Lauren, who's one of my Portland peeps. We have a celebrity design she shed for auction. I love that. I'm actually in my she shed. It's also my office. Timing is everything. All right. So keep things moving along as you go. One of the advantages to digital is that you can do another take. If it doesn't look like a really strong take the first time someone does their presentation, you can do it again. And model COVID-19 safe behaviors, okay? So if people are hugging to each other, maybe not such a good idea, okay? So keep that in mind. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about creating a development plan that is post COVID-19 or as you move through this era. And again, I submitted these slides a week ago, and the world has changed quite a bit in the last week. So I want to say it's your reimagine plan, okay? Because you may have big work to do in your organization that has to do with your DEI work, allowing people of color to have a voice within your organization. I don't know what it is, but I do want to say again, we need to be listening, white people, all right, and give people of color a chance within our organizations to talk and share what is going to make a stronger organization for them. So it looks like Joanna had a virtual event in April, and our online silent auction was more popular and profitable than ever. We got feedback from many donors asking if we could, and then it ... Okay. Anyway, thank you. Next slide. And I like Margot's too. We're actually doing a no contact event to help raise money for us and also give back to San Diego. Very nice. So when you create your development plan, I want to highlight the basics of solid fundraising. There are, because I do assessments for organizations and then help them create plans. And these are some of the things I look at. Next slide. Evaluate how much time you're spending with your donors, building relationships with them before you're asking them for money. So think 80-20. 80% of your time spent on cultivation and stewardship, 20% of your time on asking for money. So the antidote to that fundraising grind piece, for one, it's going to make your life, it's going to make it easier for you to raise money, is in between your campaigns. You need to spend time getting to know your donors and talking about the impact of their gift. So I saw some of the data that Laura referred to earlier in her opening statements, and it was interesting, the data from the recent poll, and donors want to hear the same things that they've always wanted to hear. What are you doing with the money? Show me the impact of the gift. Basically, show me the investment. And they want to know how you're doing financially. We need to have a model where we can be more transparent with them and dispel the overhead myth. I think we have an opportunity here as we create stronger partnerships with donors and we show them the value of our mission, that we can get rid of this whole idea that overhead is actually an issue. Next slide. So as you create your new plan, find ways to involve your board in a way that you're going to meet them where they are, okay? So some of the biggest complaints that I hear from staff is my board doesn't fundraise. And what I hear from board is, I was recruited to this board and I was told I wouldn't have to fundraise. So for most nonprofits, the recruitment process is broken. It's okay to tell people on the front end, as you're recruiting them to be on the board, that you are going to have them be a part of the fundraising process. And if they are afraid of that, spend some time explaining to them what that means. We'd like you to come when we can all gather again, of course, to thank you events and thank our donors. We'd like you to make a few thank you calls, or maybe thank you calls aren't comfortable for you, but you prefer to write notes. Things like that. What is so common, what I have seen too many times, is that all of a sudden it's like, we need to raise money. And everybody starts looking at that poor development coordinator or development director, and they're expected to do all the work. And because the board's thinking, I was recruited and I was told, first of all, that, my buddy told me that I don't have to spend that much time on this board. There's not that much that I have to do. I was never given really a job description. I didn't have a pledge form. I wasn't told, like, these are the things I'm expected to do. I just get to come to meetings and feel good about supporting this organization. I wasn't even asked to give money. And then all of a sudden, this poor development person is expected to do all of it by themselves. So involve your board and do it in a way that is accessible to them. And also, as I talked about earlier, really look at your recruitment process right now. Are you being honest with your future potential board members about what it means to be on your board? It's an important job. They supervise the executive director. They need to have a job description. And Sabrina said that they have a job description that they give when they're recruiting potential board members. And Sabrina, if you are willing, probably others would like to see that. And if you're willing, state that so some of you out there can reach out to Sabrina and see an example of it. Next slide. Fundraising should be joyful for all involved. So this highlights what I just talked about. If you are hiring a development person and expecting them to be the rainmaker, and your ED doesn't know how to raise money and your board doesn't know how to raise money, you are basically setting that person up for failure unless they are extraordinarily patient and they've been given realistic goals. So please keep that in mind when you are working with your development staff, that it's a team that is part of it, and that the board knows how, at least some of the basics on raising money, and that they are an important and integral process to it, and so does the ED. Now, I have talked to so many executive directors in my career that are terrified of raising money. And what I have found, and maybe again during this time, you as a team can be finding webinars that you look at together, that if you take it in incremental steps, it's not as hard as you think. If you've got a development person that's willing to make an ask, but ED, you need to come on that call. Think about it in those terms. But what I think is really important is that it's joyful for your whole team. And your team is your staff, your volunteers, and your donors. So donors need to be thanked in a prompt and meaningful way. And it could be simple, like that postcard that I got from Solid Ground in Seattle, where it was just a nice little handwritten note that welcomed me to their family as a brand new donor. So, Colton, I love your comment. Job descriptions for board members are available from BoardSource, which is an outstanding resource. And Google is your friend. I totally agree with that. So again, if you want to do your own capacity building, this is an area where you can go to Google and look for some resources. All right, so next slide. So create a simple plan, A and B, and share it with stakeholders. And the reason that I'm saying this is because there is so much change that's going on in our world right now. Okay. So some organizations have events in the fall, for example, and they are hoping that maybe there can be small gatherings and that people will host them in their home. So that might be a plan A for your fall event. And your plan B is that it may have to be totally virtual. All right. So that is an example of plan A and plan B. There are other options that you could consider. And it's so important that you share those with your stakeholders. So talk about this with your board and share it with them, because right now there's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of organizations out there right now are in the process of planning their budgets for the next year. And it's really hard to know what it's going to look like. And I'll tell you what I have been telling people, and I do not have a crystal ball. I wish I did. I don't. But that, yes, events in the spring have gone really well. And I'd like to hear from some of you that have done virtual events, how your budgets did, okay? Or how you did on reaching goal. I think as we move into the fall, especially if your event is going to take place when the weather is still good and we don't have a new stay-at-home order, that it is going to be harder to get people to their screens to watch your event. Could be wrong, but that's my prediction. So what I'm telling people, though, what I think is that fall events might struggle a little bit, but I think your year-end appeal has a chance of being really strong, because I think we're going to be back home again, based on what I have read about the science of pandemics. There's typically a second wave, and the second wave can be more intense, and it happens during the flu season, which is going to be this winter. So it'll be towards the end of the year. Something I want you to think about or keep in mind is, yes, there's a lot of people out there who have been unemployed, who are unemployed, are maybe going back to work. However, a lot of people have kept their jobs. And a lot of those people, when you think about your major donors, they had big trips planned, right, for this year. Maybe they were going to, and other plans for their that they were going to use their resources on. And what's happened is we're at home. And so, for example, I had a trip planned with my mom for this fall. We were going to go to Portugal. That trip is not going to happen now. So people are saving money too. You may have seen that funny, there was a little joke about, budget during COVID, and, things that people were spending money on, entertainment zero, and travel zero, groceries, $7,000, whatever. It's like, that's all people had to spend money on. So certainly people are starting to travel a little bit now, but it is going to be closer to home. My whole point in saying that is that, folks, not everybody is suffering financially right now. There are people who are actually saving money. Stock market has gone up and down. So again, your major donors who are looking carefully at their investments, People have been tentative, but I'm watching now. People are starting to commit to bigger gifts. I've got one organization I'm working with, and they are looking to their major donors for multi-year gifts, which is also a really great strategy to look at. Again, you need to be super careful about those conversations, that what the landscape of their life is like right now before you start asking for money. So let's go to the next slide, please. Please start posting any questions you have. I'd also really like to hear about how your spring events went. Let me know if you've got a fall event coming up. Did you do a COVID campaign? I'd really like to hear how that went. Post away. So more than ever, communications is going to be important in your fundraising plan. And you're going to need to be sensitive more than ever about that, as I mentioned earlier. This is a time, I think, as I said earlier, about reimagine. As I said, white people, we need to listen, okay, so that we can reimagine what our nonprofit looks like and what our services look like, so it really is truly accommodating the true needs of our community. We need to look at the way we do business. I think we've got some extraordinary opportunities right now to start questioning the way we do business and what is going to make the most sense. Going back to what Lynn said earlier about, do we need to keep paying rent? Is it more important to keep people on staff? That needs to be a nonprofit-wide conversation, because I would not make that decision for your staff knowing that they don't have a good setup. It is important that if people are asked to start working at home, that they are truly outfitted well to do that. Do they have a phone that you are paying for? Do they have a computer that satisfies the needs for working remotely? Can they afford to pay for Wi-Fi? Are we making assumptions about things like that? Maybe they really aren't set up for this long term. They live in small quarters. They have several roommates, 3 or 4 big dogs, who knows? Or they have to homeschool their children at the same time. I mean, we need to be sensitive about that. But reimagining the way we do business, I hope we're going to be more flexible and letting people work from home more if they need it, especially fundraisers where we have such an outward facing persona in the community, that we have time to work at home and do the writing we need to do and recover before we have to go back out there and put on that bright face and be the ambassadors. So keep some of those things in mind, and especially as you weave them into your communications. So I saw earlier on a comment that somebody said that they were 15% over goal on their virtual event and their expenses were $5,000. So what is that telling us, people? Okay. I think there's some important things to learn. I don't know that the virtual model is going to work forever. I think people are going to want to be back together, but is this an opportunity for you to shift to more of a face-to-face way to raise money? And I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right. Kenise Huber asked, can anybody suggest an inexpensive virtual auction platform? And I don't know of one that fits that, but if you do and you want to put it in the comments, please do that, or reach out to Kenise through the app. Okay, I love the app, the conference app. All right, next slide. So I think, and before I start talking about that, we need help upping our game on virtual presentations. What do you recommend for fundraisers? And, I've seen people doing this really inexpensively. And, but this is what I learned the other day. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly or not. Because I haven't a client that's getting ready to do a virtual event. They are pre-recording all of it up to the live special appeal portion, which is going to be in a studio. And when we were talking about the platform that we were going to use, we suggested Facebook Live. And what he told us, the audio visual guy who's been doing this since March now, is that Facebook Live is changing their code a lot. So I don't know that that's necessarily the best platform. What I have seen work really well, though, is when people are recording their own videos and then launching it on YouTube or Facebook Live. Some are using Vimeo. There's a lot of different options out there. And so, Margot, I don't know if I've really answered your question, but you are more than welcome to reach out to me personally. I am going to have my email address at the end of this. And anybody is welcome to reach out to me. I'm also on LinkedIn, which I check pretty often. It depends. Sometimes I forget about it. I get caught up in my world. And I'm happy to help answer your question. But, we are living through a time that will definitely be in the history books, aren't we? And I'd say patience and accommodation are some of the most important things that are going to help us get through this. And I have to say, it's why I started this webinar with, I want you to do what you need to do to be comfortable right now. I'm going to send you these slides. You don't have to take notes necessarily, because we need to take care of ourselves now, I think, more than ever. And we need to keep this in mind as we're interacting with others. You're not hearing back from people. Be really patient. And let me tell you something, like, what happened to making phone calls? I work with people all the time and say, yeah, I emailed them, I texted them, and I didn't hear back. It's like, pick up the phone. Let them hear your warm voice. Hi, just reaching out to you. Want to find out if that meeting date works for you. How are you doing? Be patient. And at a certain point, you've got to fish or cut bait, right? And move on, because you don't have a lot of time either. But be mindful. People have been homeschooling, they've been afraid of getting sick. Right now, people are really, really upset as they're learning about the way that the injustice that has been happening in our community. There's a lot of people who are getting educated for the first time about some of these issues, and it's deeply upsetting and troubling. So we need to be mindful of that. So next slide. I heard this recently, and I think it is so important to remember. Self-care is group care. So be mindful of how you are taking care of yourself right now. You know what? It's okay if you need to lie down on a Saturday and not do very much during the day, if you can carve out that time for yourself. It's okay to say, you know what? I would rather talk on the phone than meet by Zoom. And this is what I'm doing right now. If I'm meeting with someone one-on-one, I'm saying, can we talk on the phone instead of meeting by Zoom? Because I'm finding the screen to be exhausting. It's important to look at, are you getting enough rest? Are you eating well? Who is in your circle right now of people? Are they supporting you? Are they taking away? Is this the time now to speak up and ask for what you need? Because self-care is group care. The more you take care of yourself, the more you're going to be able to take care of everybody around you. So keep that in mind. Next slide. So on the app, You will get to see my slides. I also have a process sheet for you to get your ideas flowing on what you want to do next based on what we talked about. I. I'm the one who's doing the talking, right? Which I don't necessarily relish. I prefer it to be a two-way conversation. A process sheet to help you get your ideas flowing and maybe share with your team. Really want to encourage you to start working into your team process. How are we going to do capacity building? And like I said, some of you may have budgets where you can hire people to help you. Others of you may not. There's so many free resources out there. Like Colton said earlier, Google is your friend. Where do you need to boost your program and how are you going to do it? And then I'm also going to share with you examples of a couple really strong appeal letters. And that, again, they're in the app, and they were for the COVID campaign, but keep them in mind as you are planning your next campaign. So Colton has a question. What do you recommend for tying fundraising to COVID-19? Purdue University flopped by saying donate $3,000 for 20 tests. Yikes. Well, I'm going to answer this in a couple parts. One is, right now would, in my opinion, is not a great time to launch a COVID campaign because of what's going on in the world, not only what's going on with the current civil rights issue that we have, but also because I think people are not as interested in talking about COVID. What I think is helpful, look at the examples that I gave you. West Columbia Gorge, they talked about how COVID will affect their mission and that they're going to need help in supporting the people and animals in their community. And when you look at the two emails that are, excuse me, not emails, but the two letters that I gave as an example, they talked about their pivots. So I think that is that's a stronger response and request than, $3,000 will provide 20 tests, though that is compelling, especially when you're trying to get kids back to school, right? Okay. And Lauren, I see your questions, and go to the next slide because now is the question portion. We've got a few minutes left for you to be asking questions or making comments, for you to comment on what each other is saying. So now thinking gala, maybe with timing, should that be part of end of year campaign, a kickoff to the year end season? So that is a really good point, Lauren, because another thing that I think has been really successful with the virtual events is when they are looked at as a longer term campaign versus just this one day event. And I think the idea of it kicking off is quite ingenious, Lauren. I like that. So if your gala is in October, for example, and you build a theme that starts and you launch it then, and it's tied to your entire goal. So I'm going to make something up for you, Lauren. It's like we have to raise $500,000. You go into the event, you've already raised, $200,000 at the event, you raise a total of $350 by the end of the event, and then your year-end appeal, which typically does, 125, and we're going to stretch this year, and it's 150. Okay, we have seen a lot of our former funding being redirected to orgs that provide food, medical, etc. How do you compete with them if you're not one of those nonprofits? Yeah, very good question, Joanna. And I don't know what your organization does, but I'm going to give you an example. So West Columbia Gorge Humane Society, they do not provide basic needs for humans. They, provide animals for humans. And people started giving them money before they even asked for it. What I am seeing, and this is why it's so important that you build these relationships with your donors now, and that you keep having these conversations with them about why it's important to give to your organization and what you are doing. Donors give because they love your mission. So reinforce the power of your mission and how COVID is affecting it right now and how they can help you be stronger in the end. So I've got a client, for example, that does it's construction trades. They teach folks how, it's a pre-apprenticeship program, and they had a donor before COVID who had committed $10,000 to that program. And then what happened was COVID hit, and this donor came back to them and said, I actually want to give you $100,000. So they care, that donor cares about that mission that had nothing to do with basic needs, cares about the mission. So this is why it is really important that you strengthen your relationship with your donor and talk about what is going on with you right now and your organization and how this downturn is affecting you. Okay, what else? Are there any other questions, comments I'd love to see? Go ahead and have next slide up while we're waiting for those to come in. Ooh, this is a good one. What do you recommend for addressing the overhead myth? Okay, so in my experience, and I've been raising money for 25 years, I've been in this sector for 30. I remember a donor asking me one time about overhead. And first of all, GuideStar, if you Google overhead myth, there is an excellent paper about overhead myth right there that talks about dispelling it. I think what you need to do to not an argument, because I wouldn't argue with people. You need to talk about how your budget, if somebody specifically says, I'm concerned about your overhead, what you need to say to them is, let's talk about our budget and what the overhead means. Don't be afraid to share that with them. There are very few nonprofits out there, probably, that have anything extra. So, and I've also found that when donors start to meet the people that fall in the overhead category, and they build relationships with them, they really understand their value. So I would talk about the importance of professional development and investing in your staff and what that budget actually means. So, oh, Laura, my buddy Laura Dietrich, who you heard from earlier, she said, Sally and I are working on a research project about messaging to different audiences in this new world. Stay tuned for that. Thank you, Laura. Yes, and thank you for inviting me to help talk about that. So I think that donors care about overhead only because somewhere along the line somebody told them that they should, and that we need to change the conversation as nonprofit professionals with education. And also by talking to them more about the importance of your nonprofit and the work that it's doing. Spend more time talking about impact, and they're going to spend less time wondering about what you're doing with their money. So we've got a little bit more than a minute left. I'd love to see some more questions or comments. Again, I've got my email address up here. If you didn't feel comfortable doing it in a public way, that is totally fine. And you want to email me privately, I am totally open to that. I was trained as a teacher. I have a master's in teaching, and that's why I call myself a fundraising teacher. And I love to work with organizations who are interested in learning about it. So I am going to wind this down by thanking you for joining me. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing in your community. all of you could be out there making more money doing something else, but you chose to work in the nonprofit community. And that is really important. And that's one of the reasons why I get so angry about the overhead myth. Because I mean, I could have gone and worked for some corporation and could be, making probably close to $1 million a year. I don't know, but I could have made a